Good evening, everyone who's now watching again for the 12th week. Don't give up Ukraine. My name is Ruud Meij, and I'm with you with Olena Bila. Olena, you shortly introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Olena Bila. I'm a philosopher, head of philosophy department at Ukrainian Catholic University, Lviv, Ukraine.
Thank you. Very short, why we started this Don't Give Up Ukraine. It wasn't intended to start on the first day of the war, but actually we started on the first day of the war. But then situations were already very tense. And what we want to do with this, make a small contribution every week, create a moment of reflection on things what we think could be relevant from what's now going on in Ukraine. So we had several subjects. Last week we had the subject of intellectuals and the future of the university, and we had a meeting on women in war with Oksana Kiss, and this evening our topic is peace, taking sides for peace. I think a very challenging subject for us, and I'm very glad that we have here with us Olena Zakharova. You will introduce you in a minute, and also Frans Geraedts. We know each other, so in that sense, it's very comfortable of doing that. So first of all, Olena, can you share something about you? Who is Olena Zakharova?
Yes, thank you for the invitation. I am from Kiev, and I'm head of civil society organization Ideas for Change, and since 2014 I was involved in a number of peace building projects and dialogue projects with people from non-controlled government territories of Donetsk and Lugansk, and people from Ukraine and Russia. And earlier I have public servant experience and diplomatic experience.
So very
nice
welcome.
to be with you this evening.
With a very relevant experience on our subject for tonight, I think. So thank you. Frans, could you share something else?
Yeah, Frans Geraedts. I'm a philosopher, a colleague of Ruud. I've been working in Ukraine for 15 years, in Lviv and in Kiev, basically on the integrity of government and anti-corruption and democracy building.
Yeah. And you have been there often, Frans, in Lviv and Ukraine.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Good, thank you for this introduction. First question to you, Olena. We ask this every week to get kind of what's happening this week. What is the mood this week from your personal expression in Ukraine regarding the war? So how is it today for this week?
Okay, speaking about this week, I would like to mention the event that happened 2 weeks ago in Ramstein military base that broken the deadlock with a supply of Western offensive weapons to Ukraine. And this week, Ukraine started receiving these weapons, and some of them have been already delivered to the front line. Which is around 1,200 kilometers. And this gives the means to keep the front line for the Ukrainian army and prevent the movement of the Russian army in depths of Ukraine. And moreover, in some sections of the front line, it gives the opportunity to the Ukrainian army to squeeze out the enemy, like it happens in Kharkiv region. And meanwhile, the whole territory of Ukraine is a target for missile strikes. And I would say that there is no safe place in Ukraine right now. And on the occupied territories, the invaders continue practice their genocide approach. oppressing, horrifying, raping, killing people. And the most terrific situation is on the Azovstal. It is in Mariupol, where more than 1,000 Ukrainian defenders plus some civilians are encircled and blocked by the Russian invaders, and they lack food, water, medicine supplies, and they have around 600 wounded persons, and there are no chances to deblocate them. A lot of world leaders addressed Putin and Russian authorities to do the procedure of extraction, and there is no result. And it means that Putin has no mercy to people's lives, and as we see, he attempts to kill all these people, unfortunately, and we see it as a Russian strategy in this war.
Yeah,
and we address all world leaders to help in this situation.
And I think things in Kiev have been changed the last couple of weeks. So Kiev was under siege, so to say. And now you see that embassies are opening again. And
yes, people returning to Kiev, and a number of embassies and international organizations begin to reopen, and it means that it is rather safe, this place, and it continued developing under this military situation.
And you personally, how are you doing?
Right now, I'm not in Kiev. I left Kiev on the 25th of February. I plan to return to Kiev next week, but I have contacts with my friends who are living there, and they say that the city is reviving.
Yeah, that's the feeling what we get here. So we are doing now from the Netherlands, so we're feeling that the city is reviving.
Yes, and many cities that were under the siege and were liberated by the Ukrainian army, they are adapted to more or less to live under these circumstances, and people trying to find some ways, develop their communities, to restore the buildings that were ruined, and they are very motivated to continue this work.
Thank you for updating us on this. So for this meeting, we wanted to talk about a subject what feels so far away when you think about peace. I think something that's from another world, well, we were thinking, well, that's true, but at the same time, and it seems impossible so to think about it, and at the same time, it seems so immensely important to think about peace today, not only about the outcome of peace, of negotiation or whatever, but also about how to get there, how to build something what can lead to peace, and what we ever wanted to understand about this. So that's why we choose this, and we want to discuss it with the two of you about how you look at this subject. Maybe you make some opening remark to this difficult question of peace and how to get there. What give us some of your ideas about it? How you look at not so much at the possibility of prosperities of peace, but more how we can think about in a fruitful way on the question of peace for Ukraine in the future.
Peace, it doesn't mean the absence of war. Peace can be of different quality. And it was the issue that I always speak before the wide-scale aggression on February 24, because I cooperated with a number of European peace builders, and we discussed it in our mixed groups. Peace should be sustainable, and it should mean that it creates the conditions that the situation of war doesn't repeat in 10 or 20 years. Why the proposal to agree with Russia somewhere in the middle is false, because it doesn't create the condition for this sustainable peace. And I believed deeply in soul that before 24th of February that it is impossible to find this decision with the today's Putin's Russia. Unless many peace builders, I supported idea that Ukraine should receive military support, and it doesn't contradict the idea of peace. Ukraine doesn't intend to use this weapon against Russia, but we should be ready to any situation that can happen. At the moment, we see the change in the understanding of peace in Western political circles. And I would say that it happened several weeks ago, and our Western partners start to understand that providing us with weapon, they do not provide charity, or they do not waste some money. It is Western investment in the security of the whole region, and maybe of the whole world. And it doesn't contradict the idea of peace itself. The only way to have peace in this region is to defend the aggressor, to defend non-democratic Russian officials and Kremlin itself.
Thank you. Frans, can you say something about what, if you think about peace and about peace for Ukraine, taking sides for peace, what is the beginning? What should we start thinking about when we want to make sense in this world of this word, what today seems a bit like senseless? That's all.
Well, I think Olena said it beautifully, and it is she is clear on points where the peace and conflict resolution community in the world has a very great trouble in being clear, and that is what I've seen in the last weeks, actually since the war started, is there are many people in the world who wish this war away, and there's several motivations for that, some very understandable and good motivations, and others not so much. But I think the best motivation there is, and there are many people who are motivated by this, is they want to save as many lives of Ukrainians, secondary Russians, but first of all Ukrainians, as possible. So their desire for peace comes out of this. There are others, right? So there are people who want peace because they don't want a conflict between NATO and Russia. And there are people who want peace because they don't want a nuclear conflict. Now, all these motives are in themselves, so to speak, just right? but I think the people motivated by saving as much as Ukrainian lives as possible is in a sense the strongest one. The problem is, and that is where Olena is so clear, that if you think about how to get to peace, that in the conflict resolution community and tradition, the first idea is always to find a compromise. And it's that idea that is so fatal in the situation where we are. And the Israeli philosopher Margalit, I think 3 of the 4 of us know him and his work very well, has worked that out in a small, wonderful booklet where he talks about compromises and rotten compromises, and elaborates the idea that there are some compromises that you cannot make. And we are in a situation like this. So I was talking this afternoon with somebody that has deep connections to this community here in the Netherlands. And I asked him, so, okay, do you think it's even possible? And he said, no, you're right. There is no compromise in this situation that would not be a rotten compromise. And he added something to that I think is also very, very important. He said, and even if there were, your opposite party cannot be trusted in its commitment. Right? So if you would find a compromise, the Russian side has shown repeatedly, again and again, and specifically with regard to Ukraine, that it will not hold to treaties, not hold to promises, not hold to commitments. So if there is no compromise, that is no rotten compromise, and if the opposite party cannot be trusted, there is actually no conventional conflict resolution route possible. And in a situation like that, in a war like this, peace comes only after the Ukraine has defeated Russia. There is no other way to create peace than to defeat the invader. And that is difficult for people who have committed their lives and their work to creating peace and conflict resolution instead of war. That is difficult to accept. And I think actually that within the community, a process of mourning is necessary about this impossibility. And that is, and I see that as a process of mourning for all these Ukrainians that will die, that have died, because we're already too late. Right? We are in an absolute sense already too late. There are already so many people dead. There are cities destroyed. There are so many people with horrible wounds. There is so much trauma already. We are too late already, and we need to mourn that in the active sense that we need to do something about it. And this active mourning in the case of this war is that we help Ukraine to defeat the Russian army.
So if you say about this compromise, basically you're saying 2 things. First of all, there is, if I understand you correctly, every compromise would today be a rotten compromise, in the sense that before
every imaginable, yes.
Yes. And the second thing is you can't trust Russian Putin in holding their word, so to say, keeping to their word. So could you be bit more specific why this would be a rotten compromise by design almost, or Olena or Orissa, of course. So it's not only for you, Frans, to ask.
No. I'll think about it, but
maybe a few words how I see it. It is, many people say that Ukraine should surrender and save a lot of lives. But for me, it is a choice between swift death and long time death of people and of the nation, I would say, because we see the strategies that Russian army use on the occupied territories. There is no flourishing life there, and it's. I'm speaking not about only about Ukraine, but if we look at other protracted conflicts that were earlier launched by Russia in South Ossetia, Abkhazia, Transnistria. And we risk that in 20 years on the territory of Ukraine, if Ukraine surrender, we will have the same kind of population that we have in Russia, that supporting this militarism, and it will be much more threat to Ukraine. Plus 20 million, around 20 million. We can see it following the history of Russia during Putin, when Putin became a president 20 years ago. And when we speaking that we can't let Ukraine defeat, I would say it isn't only about Ukraine. It is much more. It is about Western values, about democracy, about humanism, humanities, and it's not a regional conflict. And thanks to God, politicians started understanding it.
Yeah. You could also see this shift in perspectives. Even in the Netherlands, you could see very clearly that our Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Hoekstra, he was in Kiev recently, this week, and he framed the conflict in a way that he wouldn't have done a couple of weeks ago as an ideological conflict, as he says. So, so it's basically a way, the way of life. That's not, as he put it, I think that's not accurate enough. But it's you could say this is in a sense a very outstanding war, in a sense. So in the sense that it is a war with the nuclear power. It's a war with an autocratic regime, to put it mildly, so to say, and that makes it, in a sense, also an outstanding war. And that is also to do, I think, about how you think about what a peace could like in the future. So, no. Maybe, Olena, do you have something to contribute to this?
Yeah. You know, when I hear people like Habermas or current Pope, Roman Catholic Pope, saying about the need for reconciliation and peacemaking, I think what these really prominent thinkers and intellectuals, what they really miss is this really civilizational gap. Because I'm thinking about, when I think about Habermas, I think about Kant and about his idea of that we are all rational beings. And things like peace, we come to them rationally. It's something that comes from the nature of human, as a Homo sapiens, so to say. Then I think about Pope, and he really believes that he will go to Moscow, talk to people, and they will reconsider their position. So again, we have this tradition of judging your enemy by the standards of your own culture. Mm-hmm. And normal war, so to say, traditional war that we know, that we are familiar in Europe, were the wars for resources. Why you come? Anytime at war, you need more resources. What is this war about? Is this a war for resources? Well, I have I have an intuition that this is not really about the traditional understanding of the resources that is involved, but something that Nietzsche would call resentment. That is a war of identity, a war of the Russian side. When we talk about any type of agreement with them, the agreement is impossible exactly because of their reasons why they come in this war. The first and the most important thing for them is to restore their past back. So to say, to step back in the same water, you know, to become again, as Trump said, America will be great again. This is a very close idea. Russia will be great again. And that's a real failure of the state as Russia today it is, because for them we see this deep they already lost because they don't see a future for themselves other than going back. So going back in restoring the past and nothing to see in the future. They cannot. This is actually the biggest failure of the Russian intellectuals. For these 30 years that they separated from the Soviet Union, that we became separate countries, the intellectuals of Russia were not capable to create a legitimate image of future that will replace or that will be a good substitute for this image of themselves in the past. And what we see now is really a result of that failure. And well, I think why this compromise is rotten compromise, because we don't have the machine that will get us in the past. That's it. We cannot provide a world based on the principles that do not function anymore in the world. And for Ukraine, you know, we save people right now, but in coming in peace on the terms that are possible right now is actually killing Ukrainians slowly. You already mentioned that. You know, we save them right now from the immediate death, but we actually are subscribing to the extermination of the nation as such. That means the whole project of Ukraine as the democratic, free state that wants to build just a prosperous society, a society of the happy and well being people has failed. So we kind of give them to the monster. The problem is that the monster will be fed up for a little bit. It's a dragon, you know, it's this old fairy tale image. The dragon will be happy if you feed him with another virgin in the village, but it's just for a time being. There will be a moment where the dragon wants to eat more. And then it's again, it's not the peace that we really want to come to, you know, we want really to come to the peace that will not repeat it again. Something that will not be a prolonged conflict in time, just, you know, stretched out. We really want to be in secure situation. So right now, this is a problem for us, and we need to think really for the time being that we are right now, especially for Ukrainians, it's a huge time of stress. And in the stress time, the vision of the future becomes really shortened, because you try to survive instead of really build kind of an image of yourself in future, right? So for Ukrainians right now, peace is still a far away perspective, but for the entire world, and especially for the Western civilization that is very close to this monster, that is very close to also to Ukraine, that Ukraine has so much faith in, it's really important to think to construct the type of the future that we can enter all together without, you know, submitting to the dragon. That's what I would say.
It's like the first step, so I should say, that this is what we have to have in mind what's at stake, when you think about the idea of peace in the current situation, that it can't be that it can't be a peace that 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 will mean that you have to keep feeding the dragon in the future again. That's what it is. Is that something, Frans, you are thinking about when it comes to rotten compromise, when it comes to peace?
Yeah, a lot Olena and Orisa have already said, right? That basically a compromise like surrender or giving a piece up of the Ukraine, right? That all falls in this metaphor of the dragon, right? You feed the dragon, but the dragon will come back for more, right? And in the case of the Ukraine, I would say that is guaranteed. It is guaranteed that the Putin regime will come back for more because it openly states that its goal is the destruction of the Ukraine, right? So what it is actually saying, and this is a quote, that every Ukrainian who thinks that he is a Ukrainian and not a Russian is a fascist and has to be, again a quote, killed. If his mind cannot be changed, that he begins to see that he really is a Russian, he needs to be killed. So we're looking at a genocidal project, something I suspected and at the same time underestimated before this war began. Right? We all know that Putin is talking like that, but he's not just talking like that. This is an actual project, like Olena said, and you can see this in the occupied territories, the newly occupied territories. You can see it in Kherson, right? So it will be a combination of deportation of people, of killing of the potential leaders of the resistance ruthlessly. They're disappearing as we speak, right? And then filling up the space with Russians. That's the program, right? And he will not stop till he has devoured. That's why that metaphor of the dragon is so apt. Till he has devoured the Ukraine. So that means that every compromise in terms of surrender or giving up territory is a rotten compromise in a double sense, that you are giving people to this. You are giving fellow citizens to the monster that literally will deport them, kill them, torture them. You cannot do that. You absolutely, totally cannot do that, right? So that's why that type of compromise is rotten to the core. And then the next step is this dimension of the future. So you're delivering people now to this, but you're also delivering people in the future to this, right? And especially because it will keep devouring, So that's why this is always a rotten compromise, which is unbelievably sad in the sense that it means that still more Ukrainians will die, still more cities will be destroyed, still more people will be maimed for life, right? That's the price we're paying. Yeah. Now there's a second element, no, third, apart from rotten compromise, you cannot trust the one you're trying to get a compromise with, but there is a third element which also began during the weeks of the war to disgust me ever deeper, and that is in these people that are telling the Ukraine that the Ukraine supposedly needs to find a compromise. They're telling that to the Ukraine, while it is of course the choice of the Ukrainian citizens themselves, and only of the Ukrainian citizens themselves, to decide that they want to give up their lives to defend themselves. And it's not up to anybody else to take that decision for them, right? This is, in a certain sense, the ultimate case of agency of citizens. It always has been, and it is here once again. So are you willing And you cannot oblige anybody to be willing, nor can you force anybody to be willing, nor can you scold anybody who isn't, and all these things. No, this is completely voluntarily. This is what Hannah Arendt calls power, as in opposition to force. It's when people talk about something, decide something together, and then act upon it. And that is one of these things that is so unique about this war. I think we all saw this happening in the first couple of days, that the citizens of the Ukraine, not Zelensky, not the military, the citizens of the Ukraine took the decision to defend themselves. And this played out in your families, right? This was okay. First, we need to save the children. It was in that order. We need to save the children. And then we go and defend ourselves. And we are aware that we're giving up our lives. But we decide that because we think that giving up our lives to defend the nation, its future and its democratic potential is worth to give our lives for. And nobody else can take that agency away from the Ukrainian citizens. It's their decision, it's their lives, and they are giving them. And they're giving them in a just cause, right? So that is also an element, I think, that needs to be taken into account, and that the peace and conflict resolution community also has to think deeper about, right? And well, anyway, yeah.
So I think it's very important. So if I a bit summarize this as what I hear, there is this one thing, and so the prerequisite for peace is the defeat of Russia. That's basically all of the three, and I add myself to this, are saying. So what in that sense, what does defeating Russia means then? It means that the end of hostilities, means that or means, is that something like, and it's also a bit like where Orissa's story triggers me. As long as the monster is there, as the dragon is there, it will open his mouth. So it seems that a peace is difficult conceivable when Russia is still Russia as it is today. It was Putin who basically said already some years ago, this is not a conflict between nations, but between civilizations, is what he said. It's connecting to this Eurasianism and so on. So how do you, what does it mean that Putin is defeated, or Russia is defeated? How do you think about that, Olena?
I think that we lack these discussions in Europe and in Western societies. We do not dare, even in Ukraine, I would say, to discuss what the defeat of Russia means. Should the Ukrainian army, when it reaches the Ukrainian border, proceed going on Russian territory, and or what would happen after post-Putin in Russia? And unfortunately, we do not have this. I didn't meet the discussions in Russian civil society among Russians who emigrated into Western countries, and it is a lack in intellectual knowledge. I can say in general, what does the defeat of Russia means for us? It is creating the conditions that in the following 50 or 100 years, there wouldn't be a threat, a military threat to Ukraine or any other bordering countries to Russia. but I still do not know how we can create it. We need to discuss and to take into account the errors of the that happened after the First World War and after the Cold War, and to create this vision of the future.
Maybe also after 1989.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big. How do you see that, Orisa, this defeat and this monster that this dragon that should no longer be there? So so Biden said something like that. So we should significantly weaken Russia. That was what he said. I think he was criticized for that, and now you hear that again and again. So what is defeating? We talked about this in among the two of us about what defeating Russia actually could mean. So in the sense, you could say anything, stopping hostilities, reducing military power. So if there's one thing why I can't like Kant, because Kant has this idea of perpetual peace. So, and he said, well, perpetual peace requires democratic nations respect human rights. That's all. And so if you think about this idea of peace, where Russia no longer is a threat to Ukraine or whatever other democratic nation or not democratic nation, how do you see that?
Well, my ideal picture is that Russia is a number of small countries. It becomes a federation of free people of different nations. But that's, no. But the reality is this: weakening Russian state is not enough. It's a good condition. But what really happens, and maybe I will start from there. Some people among my colleagues argue that this is not a new war. It's not even the beginning of the Third World War. It's unfinished Second World War. Because in the Second World War, there was left a power of the unpunished evil. There was, the part of this evil that was there was punished, but the part was not punished enough. It was not processed, so to say. And while Germany did its homework very carefully and for a long time with its own past, with its own identity, they had to rethink themselves in that. On the other side, because we now know the whole historic truth. It's not just Hitler who was evil in that part. Stalin was a part of the beginning of the Second World War, and Stalin remains a heroic figure in Russia. And Russia did not do its homework with its own past. It did not come to an image of itself that would differ from that, from that evil imperialistic figure that they used to be. And what we see now is really just a revival of the same subject, of the same state that just grows out again in its power. And even the biggest problem is that even liberals in Russia, in numbers, do not see for themselves another image of themselves. I mean, like, for example, Navalny. They ask him, will you give up Crimea if you become a president? He honestly says, no, I will not. Not in my life. That means they really cannot see themselves other than the project of the empire. And so
you just said something a couple of minutes ago about resentment. So is that related to what you are now saying? Yes. It's not coming to terms with your own history.
So I think if we really think what would be the moment to end this is actually an internal change that takes place in the Russian society about how they perceive what they are really. You know, coming, so to say, in peace with your own self, being something different other than this monster. You know, you have, I mean, for God's sake, you have such a huge country with huge resources, with a big number of people of different nations and languages. You can be really a leading power in the world, and not by taking over neighboring country, not by really trying to restitute your own failed past. How come that you, the big nation of 140 million people, cannot imagine themselves other than that? That is a big question for me, you know. And if it doesn't come internally, as long, even if they become, now I was joking about this, you know, that I see Russia, ideal future of Russia for me is the country of small pieces. But see, it even if we weaken them to a point of small pieces, they still have potential to grow in a monster, because if you don't work this, you don't go through this internal change in your own perception of the world, that doesn't help. You will just grow and search for another moment of going back in the same scheme, so to say. So I think, I don't know how to, I mean, I don't know how to do it, really, but it's something that we can push them, but they will have to do this homework by themselves.
How do you see that, Frans, already to this?
No, I like a lot what Olena and Olesa said, and this idea of that the defeat of Russia in the end will have to be that Russia defeats its own demons, right? So the defeat of Russia can be only finished by Russia itself. And then it's not the defeat of Russia, but the defeat of Russians' demons, right? Is actually what we're looking for, which is also the truth, right? Nobody here in this conversation, but nobody in the Ukraine wants to defeat Russia in the sense of conquering Russia, right? There's nothing like that. So in the end, I completely agree with that. Defeating Russia will be the task of Russia, right? In the sense of defeating its own demons. So another aspect of that I find important is that has something to do with whether or not this is a continuation of the Second World War. I think we were quite aware that there was an evil power left after the Second World War. And actually, the whole Cold War was, in that sense, a war against that evil.
I regret it.
Right? So, and we developed a very interesting strategy in defeating that evil, because we actually defeated it, right? It resurrected itself, as Orissa rightly said, but we defeated it. And we defeated it by a combination of containing it, militarily speaking, stopping its aggression, containing it, and on the other hand, undermining it intellectually, so to speak, in a broad sense, not just intellectuals, for citizens. We undermined it by, so to speak, but not we. The citizens that were under this oppression undermined it by actually leaving it already before it imploded, right? And we supported that in the West, both by the containment and by the rich dialogue we actually had with those citizens behind the Iron Curtain that didn't want to live under a totalitarian dictatorship. So if I imagine this in the situation of the Ukraine, I imagine a defeat like that. So I think if Zelensky actually said something profoundly serious and funny at the same time, when he said, well, negotiations with Russia, well, it's not that difficult. Every Russian has to leave, every Russian soldier has to leave the Ukrainian territory and everything. And if they're out of the Ukrainian territory, we can negotiate about the amount of damages they have to pay. That's in a way a perfect formulation of what a defeat would look like. There is no Russian soldier anymore on Ukrainian territory, including the Crimea, and then we negotiate the damages they have to pay. And following that would be containment in a military sense. So you prevent another invasion of the Ukraine. And we can discuss how that could be achieved. And I think it's imagine Ukraine winning this war, which is becoming possible. It's absolutely not yet a certainty, but it's a possibility, a real possibility. And imagine that happening, then it would be almost inevitable that Ukraine becomes part of NATO. And then we're basically at the same containment strategy, because then it turns around, right? A Ukraine that has defeated Russia in this war, driven Russian soldiers from its territory, then becomes part of NATO, it almost becomes impossible for Russia to invade it again. Because if it does that, it's then in a direct war with NATO.
Mhm.
Right? So that would be a practical way that I could imagine defeating Russia. And then combining that military containment with this influence of ideas. This, what Orissa called that the Russians haven't done this work, haven't shifted their civilization from a basically authoritarian to a democratic civilization. And what we've seen in the Cold War is that that actually happens simply through the exchange of ideas over time. So I could imagine defeating Russia in this way. I want to add one more thing, if I may, Rudy.
Yeah.
And that is in this whole perspective of peace and conflict resolution. Something I've been thinking about because of the Ukraine before, but more intense because of the Ukraine. And that is, I think we need to add to the peace and conflict resolution something that isn't often articulated, and that is the abolishment of war. So as long as war is not abolished from this planet, banned from this planet, abolished, every peace is only a pause till the next war comes. And even if it doesn't come in the same place, right? We're talking about Ukraine, Russia, but look at what happened in Syria, which actually was a Syrian-Russian war, right? Now, so we need to find ways to think not just peace, but to think how to abolish war. And while that is even further in the future than thinking about this peace, I think for the thinking about peace and conflict resolution, it's very important to add this element, because yet you then can begin to think about, okay, this, what I'm doing now helps peace, but does it help the abolishment of war? And when I bring this back to the Ukraine, thinking about this conflict in terms of the abolishment of war means that the aggressor has to lose. Because the only way we will be able to abolish war is that everybody knows that to start a war will be to lose it. So I think there's one other important issue here in this conflict, among so many. And that is, we have to show everybody in the world that to start a war means to lose it.
Yeah, very important thing what you're adding in that. And you could maybe also say that this radicalization, that there is actually no just war, apart from the right to defend yourself. So in that sense, but all our wars are basically unjust war, so to say, and that you have to create this the institutional and possibilities and how do you say that?
Conditions.
Configurations in the Zen and conditions like Kant already was thinking to make this in a thing maybe not unthinkable but unlikely that it will happen again, so to say. I want to, for our last part, to come back to you, Olena, and to your experience in the Donbass, in the reconciliation. So if you look at this whole narrative of just peace, that is about rebuilding and retribution, restitution, reparations. But one of the things that's also always come up is reconciliation, not on the first page, so to say, but somewhere in the process. So could you share something about your experiences in the Donbass on working on that subject? But I can imagine that wasn't easy to do that.
When we worked on peace building process with NGCA and Russian participants, we I would say we never discussed the issue of reconciliation because we considered that it was too early to discuss it. It was early to discuss during the hot phase of the war, because before February 24th, we also considered that it is a war, although we used the OCE formulation, conflict in and around Ukraine. So it is very difficult to speak about reconciliation during this military phase, and we thought that we need first to agree on a number of conditions, how we build our connections, what powers authorities on uncontrolled territories would have, and so on. We considered that it would be easier to do because the reconciliation can follow only after when you settle these technical issues and you feel safe and comfortable under these conditions. And one more problem that we saw, that in Russian and in Ukrainian, the word reconciliation has a root. This word has a root that has a semantic meaning of to agree to something, to take something that it isn't very voluntary, but to have some inner compromise.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we even proposed not to use the Russian or Ukrainian word, but use the English word with Latin root, reconciliatia, that will be easier to take for the parties. And now I think that we will be able to speak about real reconciliation after the war, after the last Russian soldier leave the Ukrainian territory, and after the damage will be compensated to Ukraine. And after that, we will start this new phase.
I remember, and I think Frans was there, and Larissa was there. We were once in Odessa on a conference on reconciliation, and this was more or less the same story. Yeah? The word reconciliation is not a very appropriate word. It's like you say, it's something that you can't do now, maybe in the future, and so on. But there is something behind this, so in a sense that you say, yeah, well, I remember, for instance, Sylvia Born, we had here in this Don't Give Up Ukraine, and she was part of a group of women, Palestinian and Israeli, trying to work not in reconciliation, but in a certain sense of, I don't know, coming to a common understanding or something like that, as a way, as building a bridge to a certain future, what could be a future where maybe a reconciliation is maybe possible, so to say. Shouldn't we come up with some other word which basically still captures something from the ideal of reconciliation, what you maybe is something what's motivating you to start this anyway?
I think the first, we should see the vision of the future, common vision. I'm speaking about societies, Ukrainian, including currently NGCA, and I would also dare to speak about Russian society, Russian intellectuals and liberals currently living in Western countries, or with speaking with someone living in Russia using online formats. I think it would be very valuable dialogue, and it shouldn't be public in any way, but it could be a test what common we have and what common future we can see.
Yeah.
And it would be a first step.
Yeah. Yeah.
We actually all three already touched upon this, right? So if Russia is driven out of Ukraine, if we talk about damages, right? And then contain Russia, because Russia will not change overnight. It will not. In all probability, Putin's regime will even survive this, the way it's entrenched, right? But then, and that this goes parallel, right? You have to begin this exchange of ideas, and that will take many forms, right? To so to speak, help Russia to, in Orissa's words, to not just let go of this past, but to work through this past and acknowledge its guilt, like the Germans did, right? That whole process. That will, by the way, also in a paradoxical way, engage the Ukraine in questions like that, right? And I think for the whole region, I think reconciliation will mean gaining access to a possible future by working through the past and the horrors of the past.
There is no way you can't go around it, huh? So to say, France, hey, that which you have to go through it, and there is no other way to do that. Okay, so last question for you, Olena. So what I said in the beginning, so when you think about this question of peace, what I think is a very important thing to think about, and you already demonstrated that for me, that it's so important. There is this thinking in terms of outcomes and in terms of process and so. And I think this, as I see it, the question of peace is not a Ukrainian question or whatever. It's a question of us all. And so what would you say? What we should contribute to this? So, or what would you expect of Netherlands or me or whatever? How to make this going possible that could lead to maybe a peace for us all? What should we do? What should our nations do?
In intellectual point of view, it's very important to follow this shift in understanding the peace. I would say that Ukrainians were the first to experience this shift, because as I remember, in 2014 we had nearly the same vision of peace, that we are nearly prohibited to defend ourselves, if we were more resolute in 2014, I'm sure that we could prevent the spread of the conflict, for example, like it happened in Kharkiv Oblast, which also tried to be besieged by the separatists backed by Russia. But there, the Ukrainian police and special military troops, they recaptured the administrative buildings. And in 2022, Ukraine had totally other vision, and it was ready to defend ourselves. It's very important to have these communications with Ukrainian activists to exchange our vision. And I remember that nearly a year ago, I had of the record meeting with one of the OSCE officials who participated in Minsk Trilateral Group, and he said, why do you Ukrainians don't want to accept Minsk agreements? You are already won this. You already win this war, and you have the victory. Just accept it. It's normal. And what we said, we do not feel that we win. Maybe we win, but this achievement is very fragile. And we feel the threats, and I would say at the moment that we were right. And now reflecting this situation, I would say it was some change of our vision. Mm-hmm. And it is very important to speak with our European partners about it, and to contribute our efforts into this change of vision of the peace, the peace concepts.
I think this is a very important what you just shared. So I want to thank you all for contributing for this, I think, important thinking about the topic of peace. Certainly it will be continued, and we'll meet again.